Welcome back. I'm Connie Sokol, your host, and today we have a unique and tender and powerful experience to share. I have a beautiful guest who has gone through an incredible experience, and I'm so pleased and happy that she's here to share it with us in such a tender way. Annika Dean is here with us today. Hi, Annika. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me today.
It's such an amazing story. I think if when you think about some of your worst fears that you hope are never realized, this woman has experienced two. The first one being you would never imagine that you are going to be part of a mass shooting, but she was in Fort Lauderdale Airport on January 6, 2017. And then she experienced an even greater fear, I would imagine, that we would all have, which is that your child would be involved in such an experience. And 13 months later, her son was. On February 14th, 2018, a gunman opened fire with a semi automatic rifle at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. The killing spree is the deadliest high school shooting in United States history, surpassing the Columbine High School massacre that killed 15. So when you think about these experiences, it tears me up because as a mother, I cannot even imagine that you knew going through this experience yourself what that felt like, what that was for you, and to know that your son is in that experience himself. So, what we're going to do today, because this topic could get heavy so fast, is that we are focusing on tools of faith and community and support. And when we're going through difficulty, whether it's something as extreme as this or something as seemingly every day as a child that's struggling in school, whatever it might be, that these tools ring true for us to be able to find the comfort, the healing, and the help that we need. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So, listeners, as you are listening, I invite you to open your heart, mind, and soul to what tools you hear that resonate for you, that you can utilize in your own life or your own family's lives, that you can be able to see and feel and experience that healing and hope and comfort. So, Annika, let's go back to that first experience for you. You are coming back from a holiday trip, you're in the airport, you're not thinking anything but I'm getting on the plane and going to be heading home. Take us through what happened and then how you moved through that after.
Well, my trip was cut short. I was planning to stay in Atlanta a few more days, but there was apparently a snow apocalypse coming. And I made it on an early flight, but my luggage didn't. So, had my luggage made it on the flight I was on, I wouldn't have even been in the airport. Um, and so I was in the airport for several hours actually, and it was very quiet. There weren't a lot of people there. Finally, they came in. My bags came in. I stood by baggage claim. I'd been there maybe 3 minutes just waiting for my luggage to come in. And then I heard gunfire. And I recognized immediately what was happening. I've been through three active killer trainings, and I knew what was happening. So I looked in the direction of the shooter. I saw him. I saw the gunfire, and I looked for what to do, for how to escape. And unfortunately for me, there was no escape. For me to go out the doors, I would have landed directly in the path of the gunfire. So I went behind a smart cart and I just laid down and closed my eyes, started praying, and um, so I wasn't watching him. He wasn't making a sound other than the gunfire. I didn't hear very much. There was a man shouting some profanity near me, and people at a distance, kind of cussing him out for what he was doing. But other than that, I was just focused on praying, and I was specifically praying for my two children, and uh, just didn't want them to lose their mom that day. And I knew that there would be three possible outcomes. One would be death, one would be injury, and one would be that I would be fine. And honestly, I had no idea which one of those three outcomes was going to happen. It wasn't necessarily revealed to me. but I did feel at the same time as I felt, a little, I mean, pretty terrified. Although, I've never been in a car accident, but I can say it's probably somewhat similar to a car accident. It's just a situation that's beyond my control.
Mhm.
But I was perfectly aware that my Heavenly Father, that God was watching over me. I felt it very, very strong. I felt the same peace um, in the airport that I feel when I'm in, a house of worship in my religion, a temple, and I felt I felt great peace, and I felt very strongly that I was being watched over. And but it's still, I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I just knew that regardless of which of those three outcomes happened, that everything would be okay. That even if I was injured or even if I died, that my family, my friends would rally around my children and that they would help them through it. I just had that assurance come to me that it would be okay. And while I was praying, a 70-year-old electrician from Rochester that was happened to be near me climbed on top of me and whispered in my ear that he would protect me. And that brought me even greater comfort. And I just knew that I would be okay. It
That
was
is
like a guardian
incredible.
angel.
Incredible. And what happened from there is you're just trying to stay in that peaceful place. How long was this? Just a minute or two or several minutes or?
The shooting went on for about 90 seconds.
Mm.
And after that, the police came in and took control of the situation. Following the police, the paramedics rushed in and out, and then the FBI ended up being there all day as witnesses.
Unbelievable. When did you know that it was over and you were safe?
We didn't for quite a while. We
Wow.
had two other situations where the police demanded that we get down immediately. We thought there was a second gunman for a while in a parking garage. At that point, I began to wonder if this was some type of a coordinated terrorist attack. So, we didn't know. And at that point, when I was on the ground, I began, texting some close friends of mine, and I couldn't text my children for some reason.
Mm.
But I had my friends make contact with my children, with their dad.
And make sure that they knew that you were safe. Unbelievable. I love, and I'm going to go back through some of these steps that you shared that in that moment. And I want to make sure our listeners know that you teach middle school students in Boca Raton, Florida. And I can't help but feel that your experience and practice on a daily basis of keeping a classroom under control and keeping a clear head and a calm demeanor, no matter what, served you in this particular experience. I loved how you said you looked around and you could see if how you could escape. Like you assessed the situation immediately. You didn't wig out, you didn't start screaming, you just assessed it. And then I love that the next step you took was to pray and you did it specifically for your children. And then the outcome of that was to feel that great peace that was outside of yourself, of not created by you, but just this peace that gave you what you said, that assurance. Those are beautiful tools that for listeners listening, that is almost any situation you can imagine is being able to look around, stay calm, assess, and then be able to go to that higher power, divine presence, whatever you might call it, God, and be able to ask for something to help you that is beyond your control because you are in a situation beyond your control. Is there any thoughts that you had kind of on the aftermath as you look back, how you handled that experience? Did you have any thoughts about how you went about that or your thoughts on how you handled it?
I was very surprised by how calm I was in the
Ah,
actual situation. Afterward, when we were sitting down and following orders from people in charge, I think I think a little bit of maybe shock set in that that had actually happened. I really felt like I needed a hug. I
Mm,
didn't know anyone there. Eventually, I found the man that shielded me and thanked him, throughout the day. And
beautiful.
um, yeah, I
Ju-
was very impressed with how well run the first responding teams are. The police, the paramedics, the FBI. They were amazing that day.
That is phenomenal. And I love how your intuitive response was to go to those divine tools that you had been using, obviously, all throughout your life. That this wasn't just the first time you had prayed, but that immediately was the first thing that you went to. Did you have any thoughts about, as far as with your faith? Did anything come to you of, oh my gosh, I really know that God is there, or I'm so grateful for prayer, or I'm so thankful for my faith that this is giving me that ability and strength? Or was that kind of as an after looking back and saying, I can see how I was calm because that was not me. That was kind of just a gift in a sense, because I don't know how many of us would be so calm in such a situation. Any thoughts on that, of how the day to day faith experiences and practices that you've had helped you to be able to kind of knee jerk react in that situation?
I have relied on prayer throughout my life. I'm a big believer in the power of prayer. I've seen it work in my life, not always the way that I want,
Mm.
but I've seen it enough that I knew that I could trust Heavenly Father, and I felt that He was watching over me. It was a terrifying experience, but it was also very spiritual. And 15 minutes after the shooting happened, a friend of mine called me on the phone that had no idea what was happening. I was, posting on social media a little bit about it. I had quite a few people praying for me, but this was not a friend that's on social media. And she called me and she just said that, she felt like she needed to call me to see if everything was okay. And when I told her what had happened, she immediately asked, what she could do. And she ended up being the person to pick me up that evening when we were released because I couldn't get to my car.
Oh
So
my goodness. And how beautiful that she felt to call. I love this principle. I think sometimes we worry that when we're in a situation that's out of our control, that we're going to have to handle it all ourselves. And I do hear this over and over, that generally speaking, there are people that come into our situation, or that we feel led to, or that they are led to us, like that 70-year-old man, that you see almost angels on earth, where these people just come and they comfort and they help, and especially, in such great sacrifice to themselves. I think it's that adage of, you see the best of people and sometimes you can see the worst of people, but it is a beautiful time to see this amazing sacrifice that happens within people. Did you have a sweet conversation with that 7-year-old man, or what
yes.
was that experience like?
Yes, he was very humble about it. I took a picture with him. His wife had been standing on the other side of the carousel, so she was maybe 15 feet away from him, or
Mm.
I'm sure that he would have climbed on her. But I think he was just a very generous person, more concerned about other people than himself, and protected me because I was the closest person.
That is just beautiful in those moments to see the goodness of humanity. That's just beautiful. If we can, let's switch gears for a moment here and let's go to your son's experience, because I want to talk about some of these additional tools that were available for your son, and then we can dovetail them with what other ones may have been available for you as well, but some that were a little bit outside of what we're talking about. So take us to the day that you're getting a text from your son that he is at the high school and there's a mass shooting that is happening there. Take us through what happened on that day.
So the first text I received, he said that there was a shooting drill going on at the school, and I immediately knew something was a little off because I worked for the district and we have them as teachers, but I had never been notified that they were going to have them with the students, and I would think that that would be something they would discuss. A minute later, he said it's not a drill, it's real. And then he started to describe what was happening. We didn't pull all of the pieces together of what actually happened until months, and I'm still getting bits and pieces 3 years later about exactly what happened with him. He
What was your first thought when you saw that text? Like when he said, it's not a drill.
I wasn't calm. So like in the airport, I was calm. This felt really scary.
Yes. I
And
can't imagine.
I couldn't believe it, to be honest. I couldn't believe it. I could believe it and I couldn't believe it because these things really can happen anytime, anywhere. But you definitely don't think it's going to happen 13 months later, after it just did, and at his high school, and
Mm.
I was definitely panicking. I wanted to keep it together. I didn't know. There a part of me, I know that I wasn't texting people in the airport until I was actually, felt like I was safe or police were with us. So the fact that he was texting me at all was somewhat of a comfort, but not really, because I didn't know where the shooter was. I don't think he knew where the shooter was, and you never know if it's like more than one shooter or that kind of thing. So I didn't really know if he was safe. He was trying to calm me down, but at the same time, he said, "I love you," just in case. So like I didn't know what would happen to him. I didn't find out until much later. He was outside the 1200 building because when the fire alarm went off, the school, many people evacuated, and so he evacuated, and the place that they evacuate to is right outside of the 1200 building. So that's where he was, and they heard the gunfire from outside the building. I didn't know until later that the gunman was on the third story at one point, targeting my son's group. Thankfully, that particular building is a newer one and had hurricane impact glass that prevented the students outside of the building from, having further casualties.
That's
He
incredible.
ran to his JROTC room. He was in his biology classroom, but he ran to his JROTC room and went on lockdown in that room.
Oh my goodness. And what kinds of things were you texting him back?
I We just back and forth. I was encouraging him to pray and just asking him if he was safe.
And probably trying to get details as much as he can tell you of what's going on and assessing, once again, assessing that situation to see what kind of a level of danger he was in immediately. That is amazing to me, that hurricane class. These details, these things, I often call them tender mercies, where there are things you can't predict, especially in a situation that's beyond your control, but there are always these good unexpected pieces that come into play. How was your son, as far as how long did this go on for, and how was he responding to it as he went along? Did you feel like he was in a good space mentally?
I think it was really tough for him. It was, and a lot of this didn't come out until later because I don't think, he didn't want to talk about it for a long time. Most of the boys in our community did not want to. A lot of the boys just clammed up. Um, but it definitely did affect him. He'd been through, what he told me later is that my being in the airport was traumatic for him,
Mm.
more than I realized. And he'd seen the way it affected me. We went to concerts after that experience, and sometimes I would get really nervous about having them be separated from me in case something happened.
Sure.
And so he had seen throughout the year the way that it affected me, and so it was a little hard on him to be in that situation himself.
And knowing how you're feeling because he'd experienced that himself. So how long did that shooting experience last for him? Was it again like a 90 seconds or something and they were able to get help, or did it go a little bit longer?
It was a lot longer, and it was, unfortunately a real disaster in terms of, the SRO hid outside the building. He didn't go in. He didn't protect the students. He didn't, and um, three coaches died trying to save student lives. So we had three teachers that were willing to sacrifice themselves without weapons, and we had an SRO that hid outside. So just about everything that could have gone wrong that day went wrong.
Mm.
So
Unbelievable. And he's going through an even, it seems like an even more traumatic experience than what you went through. And the beauty that I'm seeing, this beauty for ashes, is that because you went through that yourself in that manner, did you feel like you were able to better understand what he was going through and comfort him or help him, or at least know that he needed more help? Did you feel like your experience actually helped in that circumstance at all?
I think I was able to definitely have some compassion for him. But as far as trying to understand it, one of the things that really offended my son was that someone tried to comfort him afterwards, saying, "I know what you're going through. I had a friend that committed suicide."
Hmm.
And it really angered him. But he didn't know how to tell the person to stop saying that to me. So I had to talk to that person. And I said, we really don't know what he is going through. Even I don't know, because what happened to me, I was surrounded by strangers in the airport. I didn't know anyone personally. And so I had to kind of try to imagine. I went to a wonderful high school, and I had to kind of imagine what it would be like to have something like that happen in my high school. And he was really young. He was a freshman. It was his first year of high school. So, and he, of of the 34 people who were shot, um, five of them that were killed were people that he was close to,
Wow.
and um, and then some of the survivors, he was, his best friend's older sister was one of the survivors. His best friend at the time had a really, bad experience. um, it just, the stories all kind of came out where people were afterward, and what they all went through. And it was pretty devastating for everybody. It kind of showed me how linked together our community was, because even people that I didn't personally know, I knew very well people that personally knew them. And so I had no idea how connected our community was until this happened.
And let's move to that space. We had talked just a little bit beforehand about some of these tools that could and did help in this healing process. Because, like you said, this is not just students or administration, this is an entire community that is going to be healing from this. So, can you tell us some of the tools that helped with this, some of the things that people put into place? Or things that were actually, useful for helping the kids and helping the adults, helping everybody to be able to move beyond this.
Well, one of the biggest things, it seemed like most people had a religion, whether it was the Jewish faith or Christian faith. Our LDS community was hit pretty hard. We only had 10 LDS students at Stoneman Douglas, and two of the girls were shot, and one passed away. And so immediately afterward, I was very thankful, and I know members of our church locally were very thankful that that leadership from our church came out. We had some leaders come and speak to just, the families that were affected, and that was very helpful, and that meant a lot to me. Um, we had, after the airport, I had people reach out to me wanting to help me, if I needed a meal or if I needed help with grocery shopping, and I kind of turned it down. After the high school tragedy, I didn't turn anything down. The same people offered, and I knew better than to turn it down. I was surprised how much more what happened in the high school to my community affected me than actually being in the airport. So someone had made a remark that my son wasn't really a survivor because he was outside of the 1200 building when it happened. And uh, I don't think that they meant you know, anything by that. But as someone who survived a separate mass shooting and was there, right there, MSD, I think, kind of traumatized me a lot more than actually being in the airport. So, and I know that it really traumatized my son with, the loss of his friends and he didn't know where the gunman was. So, I think sometimes after things like this happen, people like to break it down and
Sure.
offer, their 2 cents about it. But we were just hurting. We were really hurting. And it was nice. The people that came in, there are, unfortunately, this happens a lot in our country, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. So there were a lot of people that came into our community that knew how to help us. Greg Zanis, Crosses for Losses, he immediately put up stars and crosses in the park across the street. 17 angels went up immediately, and they were lit up night and day, life-size angels.
Mm.
The community that I live in, beautiful hearts. They're still here 3 years later. Were put on lamp posts and lots of floral hearts throughout the city, 17 large floral hearts around the high school, all of these things that kind of helped to comfort us. The Red Cross came in across the street and provided food. And the crazy thing is I had a refrigerator full of food. I had just gone to Costco the day before and I just had a lot of food and it all went bad. And I know that was the same situation for most people. We just couldn't cook for ourselves. So
Yes.
it was nice that the Red Cross had food for us. They had therapists there that we could meet with, and we did. We met with them. We met with all the resources that were available. We went out to eat a lot. The restaurants were probably 3 times as crowded as usual. Just nobody had it in them to make a meal for themselves.
Yes. Isn't that amazing? That is such a truth. And sometimes we think for someone wanting to help, we think, well, what's a meal? In this horrible crisis, what's bringing a meal really going to do? But it is so healing to do something like that. And the love that is extended and the care that comes as a package deal with that. I can imagine. I'm trying to uh, assert that I would imagine, especially in the times of grief. I know things that I've experienced and other women have experienced that I've interviewed, that seems to be a common thread, that the food it comes with that love and that show of care.
Yes, it helped a lot. I couldn't eat the first few days, but after that, um, eating definitely comforted me. And, I had just reached a weight goal before this happened. And I kind of, a lot of people put on weight really quickly. And it's not something to feel guilty about during a time like that.
Not at all. And that's
It helped.
body protection, I would imagine. It's just that buffer and that you're focused on processing, I'm sure. I love you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about art therapy and support groups and all of these things, these resources that actually helped. And I love for those that are listening, I love the point that you make that in the one situation you were like, no, 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 I'm good. But you learned through that on this one, you were like, whatever it is, great. I'm so happy to have it because I know we need the help and it's going to be a helpful thing. So I love that you make that point that you accepted the help, you turned to religious faith, you accepted the help from others. Tell us about this ring theory, because I think you mentioned a couple of people that, best intentions, but not saying the right thing. And I think I am right there. I want to say the right thing when someone's going through a difficulty and worried that I'm not going to say the right thing. So I either don't say anything or I just don't reach out. Tell us about some ways that are helpful to be comforting in situations like that. And then the ring theory that talks about ways to comfort.
Well, we had a meeting the very next day. at the church, and that's where I learned about this ring theory. We had a counselor in our church that presented it, and I think it was developed by Susan Silk. She's a clinical psychologist. So this is something you can find online, and there's a diagram, and basically the center of the ring, you write the person that is at the center of the trauma. So in this instance, it would be the families of the victims. And then in the next ring, you write the name of the person next closest to the trauma. So that would be the people that are closest to those families. And then you just keep going out and making more rings for the people that are kind of farthest from the trauma. So the theory is that when you want to comfort someone who's in that center of that trauma, um, that's what you do. You comfort them. If you want to complain about the trauma or how hard it is or how sad you are or how it's affecting you personally, you complain out. So you complain to the people who are least affected or less affected than you are, but you only comfort people who are at the center of the trauma.
That makes total sense. That instead of kind of barfing out those thoughts and feelings of as bystanders or people who are like, "Oh my goodness, that's so awful," being able to not do that with those people who are in the center of the trauma so that we're not re-traumatizing them in any way. And as far as comfort, what did you find were some of the words or phrases that were the most helpful? Was it just saying I'm sorry, or was it putting an arm around your son, or what were the things that you saw that were or experienced that were the most helpful?
I honestly, that's kind of a tricky one. It's hard to know what to say.
Mm.
I first saw my friend whose daughter was killed, and we hugged. She spoke first.
Mm.
She spoke first, and she told me she was glad that Austin was safe.
Oh,
And it meant a lot to me because I had been feeling really kind of guilty that I survived in the airport, that I had this miraculous experience surviving in the airport. And then my friend's daughter, didn't make it out of the high school. And I felt very bad. And her telling me she was glad that my son was safe helped me not to feel burdened with guilt myself. So it was a very generous thing for her to say to me.
that is absolutely beautiful. Again, another beautiful, bright moment of humanity in those difficult, dark, terrible times. The human experience is incredible to me, and the capacity for human beings to be loving and kind and compassionate in the most dire circumstances and situations is just inspiring. I love, and for those that are listening, I love hearing this. One of the things that I've heard you repeat is just that hug and that touch. And it seems to me that that is such a powerful thing. Do you have any suggestions for those listening of how to go about that? I know it is tricky and it's a case by case thing, but it sounds like a hug or even just a touch on an arm or something might be an appropriate kind of helpful thing. Would you think that would be the case?
It helped me. My my son, when we walked back from the high school, I met him there. He was a little surprised, but then that I wouldn't stop touching him. But I just had to hold on to his elbow like the whole way home. It did help.
And that physical reassurance, I would imagine, knowing he's right there, he's safe and sound. That's just so tender. I love that you shared about these resources, about positive ways to comfort. And there's other good things that have come out of this. You now are a member of the Rebels Project, which is an organization that supports survivors. How has that been for you? What has that experience been like?
I looked for something like that right after the airport, and I couldn't find it. And I had a Parkland mother that was at Route 91 in Las Vegas. whose daughters had graduated from MSC, and she reached out to me, and she invited me to join a Route 91 survivor group. So even though I wasn't there at Vegas, there wasn't a survivor group at that point for Fort Lauderdale or even MSD yet. And so I joined this Route 91 survivor group. Eventually, someone in the Route 91 survivor group pointed me in the direction of the Rebels Project, and that is for all mass shooting survivors
Mm.
or bombings, anything like that, like Boston Marathon. And so it's a group of people throughout the country. There's maybe 1,100 of us online right now. I don't know, maybe more. Unfortunately, the number gets higher. And that's a small representation of all the people that are really affected by these things. So it is a great group. Whenever we go through something that is difficult, like a year after the high school tragedy, two local youth committed suicide. And it happened during my spring break. I couldn't sleep at night. So I reached out to some of the other survivors, and I've just been able to connect with them and hear their stories, get to know them. And then I was able to meet them in person. They have a yearly gathering in Colorado. It was started by Columbine survivors after the Aurora theater shooting. And it's just been open to everyone. And just being able to talk to people that aren't going to judge me or tell me to get over it. That's probably the worst thing that you can say to someone. And that's what I've learned, that even though I was so calm in the airport and I thought that I was fine, I didn't realize until later how things affect me. I mean, even just recently, I went to the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg with my kids and some friends, and in the middle of a conversation with my friend, and this gunfire erupted. It was the Vincent van Gogh exhibit, and it was the conclusion, of his life, and it showed his final paintings on these jumbo screens, and then this gunshot
Oh my
erupted, and
goodness.
it just caught me off guard. I felt really uncomfortable, and I talked to my kids afterward, and they said they did as well, both of them. Austin said they should have a warning outside. And
Mhm.
we ended up writing a letter to the museum, and I was blown away by their response and how kind they were. And they changed the signage without ruining the exhibit. They changed the signage, and just to alert people that if they had any kind of discomfort with loud, abrupt sounds, to see a theater specialist. I can't remember exactly what the sign said, but it meant so much to me that the director of the museum, didn't just ignore my email.
Minimize or
He responded quickly, and they updated it immediately. I mean, we have a lot of gun violence survivors in Florida. And shortly afterward, a few of my friends that survived Pulse, that I've become friends with since these tragedies, they thanked me because they went and visited the exhibit. And it may seem like a small thing to someone that hasn't been through these situations, but something like that can really, you know, kind of ruin your day.
yes, and
So,
re-trigger, I would imagine. I love that, again, Beauty for Ashes, that here you were alert about that museum experience and did something about it, and that has now blessed other people's lives. I absolutely love it. This has been an amazing conversation. I can only imagine how you have taken something that is just so core and tragic and unfathomable, and has been able to bring something beautiful for it. Again, Beauty for Ashes. So I so appreciate you taking the time today. If anybody out there listening wants to find out more about the Rebels Project or connect more with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I have an IG, Instagram, Ms. Dean Art Queen, or Facebook, or they can, the Rebels Project is also on Facebook.
Fantastic. And for those that are listening, I know we're all touched by a variety of tragedies. And for those that have experienced anything like this or are related to or connected to someone who has, what a great resource. Annika, thank you so much for sharing today. I love how you shared about these tools, how the community, your faith tools, and then also the community support coming together to help one another. Like you said, the crosses for losses, the 17 angels, the Red Cross, everybody coming together to offer their support and really doing that ring therapy to help everybody be able to move through that and continue to progress and keep growing through it to for that hope and that healing and that comfort. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing this experience.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So lovely. And we keep you and your family in our prayers and all those who have been affected by these experiences. The anniversary, the tragiversary is coming up on this Valentine's Day. So it'll be a tender time for people who are in any way remotely connected to experiences like this. Listeners, thank you so much. As always, we so appreciate you listening to these podcasts, and hopefully you're enjoying and receiving these tips and tools and helps that you can use in your everyday life. Again, if you want more of these tools, go to conniesokol.com. And as always, you can rate and review below so that we can get these messages out to more people and to help with that hope and healing in every way that we can. Thank you so much for taking the next step in living your purposeful, organized, and joyful life.